Welcome back, everybody, to Untangling Climate Finance. I'm Jay Tipton from Gordian Strategies. We're now into February, and this is our second episode of Season 4 in 2026. I'm really excited about this one because we're shifting from farms to forests. Specifically, the forest that most of us see every single day, but rarely think about as climate infrastructure. Today, I'm joined by Mark McPherson, the founder and executive director of City Forest Credits. Mark is a pioneer in urban forestry and carbon markets. He has spent years working at the intersection of natural capital, public policy, and climate finance. He's been focused on one deceptively simple idea: that trees in our cities are not just scenery. They're essential infrastructure for human health, equity, and climate resilience. And here's why that matters. Cities are one of the battlefields where the climate fight is increasingly being won or lost. More than half of the world's population already lives in urban areas, and that number is expected to climb to nearly 70% by 2050. At the same time, urban tree canopy is declining in many places, even as extreme heat, flooding, and air pollution are getting worse. And unfortunately, the consequences aren't evenly distributed. Studies show that neighborhoods with less tree cover can be 10 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than nearby greener areas. And those same neighborhoods often face higher rates of respiratory illness, heat stress, and other health risks. In other words, urban forests aren't just environmental assets, they're deeply tied to human well-being and climate equity. But despite their enormous value, urban forests have historically been funded almost entirely through local government budgets, and in many cities, trees are still treated as a cost rather than an asset. Now that's where Mark and City Forest Credits come in. City Forest Credits is the only carbon standard and registry in the United States dedicated specifically to urban forests. Through their elite-level forest preservation protocols, City Forest Credits helps project operators generate what they call carbon plus credits that capture not just avoided emissions, but also the real, measurable benefits trees deliver to people, including cleaner air, cooler neighborhoods, stormwater management, human health benefits, and energy savings. In this conversation, we explore how urban forest carbon credits work, why avoided emissions from preserving existing forests are just as critical as removed emissions, and what it will take to scale demand so more cities can protect the trees they cannot afford to lose. Okay, let's hear from Mark. Hey, Mark, welcome to the show. Happy 2026 and February 5th already. I can't believe it.
Hello to you, Jay, and happy 2026 to you. My birthday is in 2 days, just so it's particularly happy.
Nice. That's exciting. Do you have big birthday plans yet, or you're going to go with the flow?
No, pretty quiet.
Nothing wrong with that. Well, okay, first, where are you calling in from? And my second question is, what's the nearest tree that you can see right now?
Oh, Jay, you're speaking my language now. I'm calling from Seattle with the sunshine. It's a sort of a weak slanting winter sunshine, but it's pouring in the windows, which is great. And from my desk, I can see oak, hemlock, cypress, western red cedar, a lot of ornamentals. I can see an evergreen magnolia, Atlas spruce, and get this, within about a half block, there is also a sequoia, Sequoia giganteum, a redwood, Sequoia sempervirens, and a big leaf maple, which is huge, sweet gum, ginkgo, ash, huge tulip poplars. And the big leaf maple is one of my favorites. It's a native tree, and I used to keep bees, and people don't often realize this, but the big leaf maple is one of the early native nectar flows for honeybees.
I did not know that. And are you sitting in a forest? Because I want to trade spots with you. That's unbelievable.
Well, number one, Seattle is called the Emerald City for a good reason. There are a lot of trees. There's a huge diversity of species here. And I happen to be very lucky in a place where there are, a lot of trees.
I can see a variety of spruce, and that's basically it. But I'm not complaining because it's still some green, but would trade spots with you. That sounds awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for calling in from Seattle. I am in Madrid, as you know, and I think most of the listeners know that by now. So, to kick us off, Mark, why don't you share your name, your title, and then your quick elevator pitch on City Forest credits for anybody who's never heard of it?
Yes, my name is Mark McPherson. I'm the founder and the executive director of City Forest Credits. I would say our tagline is carbon finance for greener, healthier, and more equitable cities. The elevator pitch is cities around the world are losing trees and losing canopy just when we need them the most. Urban forests bring enormous ecosystem and human impacts, and it's long overdue for urban forests to come to carbon crediting to help generate funding for this incredibly valuable public resource. And we've created what we think is one of the only public benefit credits in the world with huge human impacts.
Great elevator pitch. And correct me if I'm wrong, you have been up and running since 2015. Is that correct?
Well, we got funded fully in 2016 and started work in late 2016.
Okay, got it. And your elevator pitch touched on problem that you're trying to solve when you set City Forest credits up over a decade ago. But when was it that you first thought to yourself, urban forest carbon credits could actually work and not just sound like some nice idea?
Well, that's a great question, too. So the problems, of course, are tree loss in US cities and global cities. It's urbanizing population. It's global warming, which brings all these weather events and heat, particularly in cities, as well as flooding and storms. All these weather events are coming to a population that is increasingly urbanized.
Hmm.
These city forests are not equitably distributed or maintained, and we have a loss of the remnant forests that are in and around cities because there's huge development pressure in and around cities. And those remnant forests aren't preserved, the trees are gone forever. Those are the constellation of problems that are faced by urban forestry. And the real problem is urban forests have been funded historically in the United States through municipal dollars. And that makes sense because it's a city resource. It's almost like a city utility, if you will. But the municipal funding cannot keep up with the tree loss. And interestingly, this is an accounting problem more than anything, because trees are recorded on the books of cities as an expense item, their liability and their maintenance expense.
Hmm.
All the many asset values of trees, the stormwater reductions, the energy savings, the heating and cooling, and the air quality benefits, those are not captured. So there's no countervailing asset value for the trees. So at the end of the year, the city budget managers, all they see is an expense. And there's a lot of pressure on city officials and elected officials to prioritize very real human needs that cities have. And there are some mayors who have launched tree campaigns to have all the many human service advocates come and say, how can you put trees ahead of people? So it's a structural problem there. We don't capture natural capital on the accounting metrics, and so trees just fall to the bottom of the list. So those are the problems. I think you asked, when did I first think this could actually work, not just sound like a good idea? Well, I'll just give you two quick ones. One was in probably 2017. We were very early. We were just getting our first cohort of projects going. And I got an email from a local Seattle company called Fisherman's Finest. And they had just launched the first green fishing vessel in the Bering Sea. The ships up there are generally not environmental friendly at all. And they were so proud of it. They were so excited about it. They're privately held, smallish fishing company. And they wanted to start some kind of offsetting for the vessel. And they reached out to us. And I thought, okay, well, they wanted some credits near to where their headquarters were, which is in Seattle. The other time was in 2022 when 13 projects around the country aggregated all their credits into one portfolio and essentially sold that portfolio. That to me was a scale sign. That's like, okay, this can work at a larger scale,
Yeah.
not just project by project.
Yeah. So you witnessed firsthand demand, essentially, as you, of course, were also witnessing the problem. And I think you and I, when we first met, I don't know, sometime in 2024, I kind of told you my anecdotal story regarding the inequity of the way that trees are dispersed around. And I was lucky to live in Los Angeles for a very long time. But when I first moved to Los Angeles, I was broke. My income was very low. So, of course, I lived where I could afford, and that was in a lower income area. And I remember where I was living in Los Angeles, There were no trees in my neighborhood. And then over the years, as my income started to grow and I moved to different parts of the city, I realized that where I was going, there were more trees, more tree coverage. And I realized, like looking back on it, that I had so much to do with the income level of the areas that I was living in, and how that just seemed very unfair to me. That I was able to get up and move because of my higher socioeconomic status, which then provided me a greener place. And of course, as you pointed out, a lot of other benefits that come along with having trees that are lining the streets versus if you live in a place where that's not. And so, anyways, all that is like an anecdotal story to say I've seen it and I can see both sides of it because I've lived and experienced it. It's very tricky. And so, anyways, I'm happy that you read the room a bit and also read the layout of places that you were at and been like, there's something we can do here, and then did something about it, which segues me into my next question, which is city forest credits is one of many carbon credit standards or registries, whatever terminology you want to use. And I think by my count, there's something around 50 active carbon credit standards in the world. And you know, as well as I do, that the volumes of carbon credits that are generating are concentrated in just a few larger standards. So my question is, given that context, why did you feel that city forest credits needed its own standard and then to develop your own methodologies instead of just using what already existed in the market?
Well, Jay, there was one of the large registries that drafted an urban forest protocol, and that was in 2013, 2014. Small world, my older brother, who's a very well known, respected urban forest research scientist, was leading the science team on that. And I served on that protocol drafting group. What we learned, what the urban forest people learned in that is that the focus of the large registries was on a lot of volume. And at the time, the lens was not so much on so-called co-benefits of projects. And all the urban forest people are painfully aware that the urban forests bring a whole suite of benefits, ecosystem and human health impacts, and that carbon could even be considered one of the smaller of those. But all those other co-benefits were not really in the lens of the large registries then. They wanted large volume projects, and they kind of really wanted to take an ex-urban or rural forest carbon template and then put it onto urban forestry, which just doesn't really work. So that registry did adopt an urban forest protocol. It has not had a single applicant in the 12 years it's been available.
Wow.
The urban forest people knew that would happen. We were throwing a party that no one was going to come to. And that was discouraging, but some good work was done. You make progress, right, by standing on the shoulders of those ahead of you. So we tried to learn from that, and we huddled and said, well, if there was ever a nature-based sector that needed funding help, it's the urban forest. And again, in our view, we're biased, but in our view, there's never a more valuable forest than the urban forest, precisely because of all the human impacts. And if we want to do this, we're going to have to do it ourselves because the big registries, they're just not that interested in it at that time. So, urban forestry is not like rural and ex-urban forestry. There are different ownership patterns, different reasons for the trees being there, different pressure on survival. And we knew the volume would be small. Also, that effort did not include anything about preserving existing forest land in and around cities. And that was more focused on planting and management. And we felt very strongly that we need to save the future nature preserves of our urbanizing cities. And that's true in the cities. It's also in the rural gradient around the cities. So we really needed to have a preservation or so-called avoided conversion protocol to help local organizations save those remnant forests. Those are the reasons, basically.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And as you know, and obviously you're very, very close to this, urban forests, despite the work, are still shrinking in a lot of places. I don't know the exact number, but it's something like by 2050, 70% of the world's population is going to be living in urban areas. So we're migrating into cities. And because of that, there's pressure to convert urban forests into housing or whatever infrastructure is required to maintain that influx of humans. But then at the same time, of course, we have cities talking about resilience and heat and social equity, all of the things that city forest credits measure. But given that, from your vantage point, what would you say the overall state of the urban forest looks like across the US right now?
Well, it's not doing well, Jay.
Yeah.
That's quite documented now. I mean, the loss of tree canopy, we've got an increase from global cities all over the world. Can we do a program here? And, we're working really hard, and it's very challenging to even do this in the United States, where there's a fair amount of science on the urban forests. And by that, I mean quantifying these ecosystem values, starting to study the human impacts in terms of health. But all the big cities are losing tree canopy. I mean, the exceptions are very few. And that's partly because to really preserve tree canopy, it's not just an act of political will. You really need to have the funding, you need to have the elected officials, you need to have agency officials, and you need to have the residents all behind it. And that's hard to pull together. I'll mention anecdotally, Palo Alto, California, I heard the city forester once say that, well, we're the Disneyland of urban forestry because we have all the factors that you need to have a really healthy, vibrant urban forest. And again, but that's an extremely wealthy city. Now, East Palo Alto, not so much.
Yeah.
So there's some efforts going into that area. But Palo Alto itself, it's got a very informed, very wealthy resident pool. It's got really progressive, environmentally focused elected officials, as well as mayors and city officials. But you mentioned the equity. I mean, the focus on equity, everyone's been aware of that for a long time. But in the last 15, 20 years, there's just been a lot of science on that, particularly that geophysical measuring of this and measuring the impacts, measuring the heat in different neighborhoods that have a lot of canopy and don't. And, the heat differentials can be like 11 degrees Fahrenheit between a canopy covered area and non. So these are all serious problems and
Yeah. Massive.
health problems. I mean, the health outcomes in neighborhoods with poor canopy are much worse than in the neighborhoods with a lot of canopy. So the state of the urban forest is not good.
Not good. And the outlook is also probably not great either, given everything that you just laid out, which is a very strong reason to be doing what City Forest Credits is doing. So we've got to be able to fight back a little bit. All right. So obviously, you have a variety of methodologies, and your primary focus, as you said, is on the preservation credits. So from the preservation methodologies, which is preventing the existing urban forest from being cut down. And everybody that's listening to this podcast knows what a carbon credit is. So they know that it's measuring carbon. City Forest Credits offers carbon plus credits, so beyond carbon. So why don't you, in plain English, describe what you are measuring beyond just tons of CO2, and why does the plus in the carbon plus credits matter to both cities and buyers?
Yes. Well, so again, the huge difference between the urban forest and the rural ex-urban forest are all the so-called ecosystem benefits that are delivered right where the population is. And those ecosystem benefits are stormwater reductions, energy savings, which is kind of a heating and cooling benefit, and air quality. Those are the main ones. And the science now is very strong, so we can quantify the stormwater reductions. Now, quick drill down into that one. Trees store stormwater in two reservoirs. One is in the canopy and one is in the subsurface conditions. Our methodology quantifies the canopy storage because that's species and age related. We do not include the reservoir that's subsurface because trees are planted in a lot of different conditions in the urban area, and it would be almost impossible. You'd have to check every tree to determine what the subsurface conditions are for that. So we have a very conservative methodology to quantify the stormwater reductions. And air quality, again, that's what, the science is very good down to the species of the tree, the age of the tree. They can calculate what those air quality benefits are. And trees reduce air pollution, to put it in common sense terms. And there are compounds that trees pull out of the atmosphere. And of course, one of the compounds they pull out is CO2, and they emit oxygen, which is humans need. And then the energy savings from heating and cooling, well, the heating and cooling benefits are enormous for trees, and you can quantify the energy savings from that. And these are all quantified in resource units, so cubic meters of stormwater, for example, as well as the avoided costs. And then there are the human impacts, which are either social equity and or human health impacts. It is not possible to quantify those now under the current science down to individual trees. However, we describe those impacts. And just to be, again, very quick, you think of human health impacts. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's physical impacts. So if you imagine a park within a 10-minute walk, that's the TPL hope, is that every resident of city has it within a 10-minute walk of a park. If you imagine a park with a lot of trees on it, that's going to produce a lot of physical health benefits from walking, jogging. It's going to produce mental health benefits. And you may have heard of the nature prescription now, where doctors are advising anxious or depressed patients to get a dose of nature. Japanese have forest bathing, they call it. So there are mental health benefits from that. And then there are tremendous social connection cohesion benefits, so social health benefits. Think of the bird walking groups, the people that meet at the park to go for a walk, families that go to have a barbecue and spend the whole afternoon there with extended families in the park. Those are the social human health benefits. And again, we can't quantify those down to a unit, but we can describe those. So that's why it's a carbon plus credit, because of all these ecosystem and human health impacts.
I think what's beautiful about the latter half of what you said, which is that anybody that has been to an urban park can probably connect with the unmeasurable, but also like social feeling of being in a park. I was very fortunate to live near Retiro Park, which is the central park of Madrid. And Madrid is a city that's very well lined with trees. There's a lot of urban canopy, but Retiro is huge and it's very green and it's got a great variety of trees and it's right in the middle of the city. And I remember two things. One, when I would be riding my bicycle from where I lived to the park, I could so obviously feel the temperature drop when I got close to the park to a much more comfortable temperature. It didn't feel like I was in a city. It was just like, whoa, there's a lot of benefit being added by this park here. That was the first thing. But then once you get into the park and there is just thousands of people that are sitting around and enjoying socializing with their friends or the cool temperatures or whatever it is. It's just so like painstakingly obvious that it's adding these types of benefits as well that, as you said, probably can't be economically quantified, but just by using your own eyes and your own senses, you can see very clearly that it's real.
Yes, yes. We have, I think, 35 preservation projects around the country. There's no scientific unit to measure the human health impacts,
Yeah.
but over 3.2 million people live within a 20-minute drive of those projects. So there are people who are cycling, walking, hopefully to the parks, but also they can take a bus. They can go with their friends and carpool to the park or that project, that nature preserve. So you've got a huge number of people that are benefited by these projects.
And anybody who's lived in a city would straight faced look at you and say, it's true. There are benefits. Like my kids love it. I love it. It's great. So I think that's the obvious benefit that doesn't need to be measured or quantified. It's a human benefit that we can think about and recognize within our own lives. But okay, so clearly a lot of strong additional benefits to the city forest credits beyond just carbon. They're premium credits. Who is actually buying the credit today and what are they looking for in a city forest credit that they can't get from your more traditional large scale rural forestry credit?
Well, Jay, so just a few quick examples of recent buyers. REI has bought credits, Airbnb, and some professional sports teams like the Minnesota Wild, NHL team, Pittsburgh Penguins. And I think they're all unified in that they want to show a commitment to a local community. So REI bought credits in the Atlanta area. They've got a big store in the Atlanta area that the local people in that store were strong advocates. They want to have a connection to the local community. Airbnb, same thing. They've got a huge footprint in cities and they want that local connection where their customers are. Sports teams, to us, that's a natural because, of course, sports teams are flying around a lot. They play generally in cities, in and around cities. And, those two teams wanted to have, again, that sense of a commitment. Now, the quantities are small because, again, our projects are small relative to the large scale exurban rural forest projects. But I think these buyers perceive the value of the credits. And we sometimes liken our credits to rare earth minerals. They may be small in volume, but they're incredibly valuable.
That's a good parallel. I like that. And I think you're right on the money there. Obviously, no knock on rural forest credits and projects because, of course, they play their part in the larger scheme of this entire challenge. But there is something to be said about being able to see it, to feel it, to experience it in your own city where you have pride or where your business operates. It makes a lot of sense to me that those particular buyers are drawn to the city forest. You mentioned a couple different teams in different cities. Love to hear about a concrete example of a project where the climate finance from the credit sales helped either preserve or expand an urban forest that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Yes. Boy, how long do we have here, Jay? But I'll give you one example. So, this is a project in the greater Pittsburgh area, and the project name is Buena Vista Heights. It was developed by the Allegheny Land Trust. At the time, in particular, was a very small land trust. I think when they first contacted us, they might have just been two people. And they wanted to preserve an area that was a little more, I think it was 125 acres. Development was planned on it. Development was encroaching all around it. I mean, not around 100% of the perimeter, but there was development clearly threatening to gobble this up. And there was an owner who wanted to develop it. And this small land trust did not have the funding to close the funding gap to buy it. So they registered this with our program. We issued about 14,000 credits to that. And again, I know that the big time carbon players would laugh at that, but I don't know the price they sold these credits for. But in general, I'm aware that projects have sold their credits from $25 to $50 a ton. Again, these are premium credits, so they've gotten a very high price. But if you just even calculate 14,000 credits at $25 a ton, that's at least $350,000 for
Wow.
this tiny land trust to enable it to actually preserve this property. And again, $350,000 doesn't sound like much, but for a two-person land trust, that is transformative.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I'm going to push back. I think that that sounds like a pretty substantial amount of money, especially given what's probably not earmarked for this type of work in municipal budgets. So it's not groundbreaking, but yeah, that's a pretty sweet chunk of change.
It is. And, interestingly, that project was rated by B0, and B0 gave it an A rating, which was, at the time of the rating, the first A-rated project on the entire B0 platform in the avoided deforestation category.
That speaks volumes. They have a very rigorous rating system, and not many receive that high of a mark, as far as I understand.
Well, yeah, I think B0 has rated something like 60 avoided deforestation projects on 5 continents around the world. Only 4 have gotten A ratings. Buena Vista Heights is one, and then another one of the CFC projects just got an A rating too from B0.
Well, congrats. That's very tremendous. I mean, that is a very small percentage of projects that are scoring that high. So that's obviously something to be proud of, but also reinforces the premium nature of the credits. Let's talk the market, Mark. Pain point. You're very close to it. You've been close to it for a long time. So you've seen the many iterations of the voluntary carbon market and all of the efforts, especially in the recent years, to improve the integrity and the systems and you name it. From your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you face in bringing urban forest carbon credits into the VCM?
Well, I would say the biggest challenges are, number one, the project operators, we call them, we don't call them developers. We occasionally get asked why, and it's because developer is often a dirty word in cities among the urban forest people, because developers are the people who cut down the trees to plant buildings. So we call them project operators. But the project operators are wonderful. They're almost all nonprofits and local governments, which is great. They really know their work. They're committed to their work. They know their communities, climate zones. They know the needs. They know the equity issues. But they have no expertise in carbon, and they have very little capacity to learn how to sell their own credits. So we have this system where, great, we've issued this wonderful, incredible premium credit, and they just lack the capacity and the expertise to sell those credits effectively.
Yeah.
That could be a whole nother podcast just to talk about that. What we do in that event, what do they do? Who actually sells credits? Do the big carbon brokers? Will they do a good job? That's a whole nother conversation. But I will just say that's a challenge, a structural challenge for our program, because those local people, they just don't have the capacity or expertise to sell carbon. So that's one problem. The other market challenge is the projects are smaller and the carbon world at large is really created for large projects. So we have had some larger companies interested or larger platforms, larger brokers. And they say, oh, well, we have to do due diligence on every project, and we can't possibly do that with you because you have all these small projects. They end up declining to work with us. And by us, I mean the projects, because the credits belong to the projects, just because they don't want to take the trouble to do the due diligence on each project. That was one of the reasons that we were focused on getting some of these ratings. So that we could demonstrate, hey, these projects are all very similar. They're all done under the same protocol. So if 1, 2, 3 get A ratings, our hope is that many of them would be perceived in the same way. So that's a market challenge. The other market challenge is that we hear a little too often that buyers will now, in the current climate, buy only from the big registries. And, City Forest Credits is we're a niche registry focused only on urban forest carbon. And as buyers become more cautious, they want the safety of the large registries. So that's yet another challenge. And then interestingly, I would say there's been a huge shift toward removal credits in the last 3 or 4 years. And of course, our preservation credits are avoided conversion, avoided emission credits. And this one is particularly frustrating for us, Jay. Calyx Global, one of the big ratings firms, posted an article on this, basically saying a lot of people think that they want to do removals because removals are higher quality than avoided emissions. And they said that is not the case. And they had bar graphs of their dispersion of their ratings. And there's very little difference in the quality of avoidance versus removal-based credits. They also make the point that avoiding emissions is incredibly important. They cite the Oxford Principles for Net Zero Line Carbon, which provides a pathway for meaningful climate action, which is, number one, avoid emissions today, but increasing over time, support the removal of carbon. But the market somehow has got it backwards that, we've got to do all removals now. I think of it as like removals are taking the offense. Let's play offense here. Let's pull that carbon out of the atmosphere.
Right.
Avoided emissions could be framed like defense. We got to avoid emissions that are going to occur.
Right.
But you can't win the Super Bowl without a defense. Can't win it just on offense or the World Cup, whatever. So Calyx, that piece makes a very important point. The avoided emissions are very important. And we see that. We see projects getting told, we only buy removals. But both types of credits are really valuable. And there's really no difference in the dispersion of quality among the two types.
Yeah, all very well said there. I like Calyx's take on it. I mean, you're right. You can't win a championship without defense. And we certainly need to protect the trees that are standing today, right?
Yes.
You and I look at this very comprehensively and holistically, and we know that both have a large part to play. I think smart buyer would go with a portfolio approach, which is a blend of both avoidance and removals so that you're spreading your balance. But yeah, I fundamentally disagree that removals are better. I think that they offer their own benefits, but you can certainly have both in the mix. And that seems to me to be the wisest thing to do. I'm looking at these trees in front of me, and it would be a big shame if they were to get cut down. And then in 15 years, we realize what we did, and then we have to plant them again to remove the carbon that was lost as it was cut down. I appreciate you explaining all those challenges. I think, we could probably have a whole nother episode breaking down each one of those challenges because you describe some structural things, some sales challenges, which are all a part of the puzzle that we're trying to solve here. So I don't know. I think 2026, we can make some progress in each of those is my goal and probably yours as well. So let's see what we can do. Speaking of 2026 and working throughout this year to make some improvements against the challenges that we're facing, both market at large, but also on a more micro scale. If you could look into your crystal ball, Mark, where do you want City Forest credits to be by the end of 2026 in terms of impact? And that might be more projects, more credits issued, or more credits sold, or maybe something that's less easily measured, like stronger trust or policy influence. What do you want to see towards the end of the year? What would be a successful year for you?
Jay, I would say that for us, probably the key is demand. And I suspect I'm probably not the only person feeling this way or saying this. But with clear demand, we could help preserve, again, the future parks and nature preserves of our urbanizing cities. Once those forests are gone, they're gone forever. So if I had my wish, we would somehow find a very brave company who could give us an advanced market commitment to say, we'll buy all the credits for the next 5 years, a signature legacy event for the company, investment really,
Yeah.
that would catalyze hundreds of projects. And we know that because, again, our project developers, quote, are not professional carbon developers. They're local nonprofits and local governments. So they need to know that there's going to be a market for their credits, or they don't want to go to the trouble of interrupting all their normal work to learn this whole weird animal of carbon crediting and comply with all the rigors of a carbon protocol. So if we had that kind of advance commitment, it would literally catalyze hundreds of projects around the country.
And protect tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of trees.
Well, yes, but here's the other thing, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Jay, which is that the carbon world tends to talk in terms of metric tons of carbon. That's the unit, right? It makes perfect sense. Sometimes they talk about acres preserved. Sometimes they talk about stems planted. And if I had another wish list, it would be, can we talk about human lives affected?
Yeah.
And I mentioned the 3.2 million within a 20-minute drive of our projects. Maybe one area where the voluntary carbon market has maybe missed a little bit of an opportunity is the focus is all on this abstract unit of CO2. And I get it. It has to be a unit. It has to be something that's fungible and tradable.
Right.
But to the extent that gets away from how is this helping people? We all know, people in the carbon will know these atmospheric benefits are enormous and critical, but that can feel a little bit attenuated and a little weak to some people. Can we emphasize the human impacts of these projects? That's what we have. I mean, I would like to see City Forest credits on the cutting edge of making the VCM real to people. Whatever, 70% of the population lives in cities. They know trees, they know their value.
Yeah.
Well, let's start talking about the carbon projects, not just as carbon only, but as a human project.
I love it. You're absolutely right. And I'm going to make a plug. All you listeners out there, if there is one big, brave carbon credit buyer or a company that hasn't yet purchased carbon credits, consider City Forest credits because the benefits are obviously, as you've heard us all discuss today, immense. So that's my plug for you, Mark.
Jay, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
All right, Mark, last question. We talk about trust a lot at Gordian Strategies, and you know it, I know it. Climate finance at large depends on trust, not just from investors, but also companies and public and the whole spectrum. What is one thing that you think the climate finance ecosystem needs to do better to earn and keep trust?
Boy, that is a big question, Jay. We think about that a lot because we feel that we have built really one of the first public interest credits in the world. And people worry about how do I verify a project that's way out in the ex-urban areas or in a developing country. I mean, you can literally walk, cycle, drive right up to the trees that we've credited. And they're implemented by nonprofits and local governments. There's essentially no profits extracted from it. There's almost no incentive to cheat or game the system because we're preserving the trees. We're not saving them to harvest them. We want them to survive. So we're aligned with crediting. And our projects still have trouble selling these credits. And in a way, I look at this and go, why would buyers not want to jump on these? Why aren't we besieged with buyers? And by we, I mean the projects, really. Then again, I understand all the many problems. We've talked about those. So unfortunately, I'm not answering your question. I'm kind of restating it. And I wonder if we don't need to, on some level, tie the carbon crediting with a human benefit, a human impact. But bear in mind, Jay, I work in a very small corner. Urban forestry is a small corner of forestry, which itself is a small-ish corner in the large carbon world. And, I probably think you, Sean, your colleagues, and your network are probably better equipped to take that larger view of what the VCM as a whole needs to do. Because again, I work in a small part of the canvas.
We all play a part, that's for sure. I appreciate that answer, Mark. I like sometimes answering a question with another question. So
Yeah.
we can keep the conversation going, that's for sure.
Jay, I can share you one headline that I'd love to see in the newspapers in 2027.
Yeah, please do. Let's wrap on that.
Okay, here's my headline. The headline is, and then there's a subheading too, Gordian Strategies and the United Nations launch a global urban forest climate program.
I love it. Let's do it.
And then the subheading is, Consortium of multinational companies join Green Cities Partnership.
Boom. I'm going to print it. We're going to make it happen. I like that.
Okay.
You got to have a vision and a direction of where to go. So I appreciate that headline, Mark. That's a good one.
Yes. Jay, thank you very much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your time, and I will let you get back to your beautiful tree watching. I'm still jealous.
Okay.
Talk soon, Mark.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Well, that's all she wrote on this one. Many, many thanks to Mark for joining me and unpacking why urban forests are an overlooked form of climate infrastructure, as well as how human-centered climate finance can help protect them before they're lost. If you'd like to dig deeper, I've linked a few key resources in the show notes, including information about city forest credits protocols, project portfolio, and independent ratings. And if you're on the buyer side of the market, whether you're a company, investor, or intermediary, this is also a great moment to flag that City Forest Credits currently has high-quality, ICROA-endorsed urban forest preservation credits available for purchase. These are premium carbon plus credits that not only avoid emissions today by protecting existing forests, but also deliver measurable, impactful benefits to nearby communities. Several projects with independently verified A ratings from B0 and Calyx Global are available now. So if you're interested in learning more about purchasing credits or exploring partnership opportunities, you can reach out directly to me at jtipton@gordian.strategies.com. My email is also in the show notes. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, rate, and share the show. It really helps others find us. And for more on climate finance, carbon markets, and impact investing, don't miss our weekly audio brief Sliced, right here on this feed. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back again next month with another episode of Untangling Climate Finance. This podcast is brought